I'm afraid the results are not good. How bad is it, Doc?
What does this mean for the baby?
The tests are back. We need to operate right away.
Operate? Is the baby okay?
The baby is fine, but we need to move now. We need to proceed immediately.
Is the baby okay?
What are our options? It's under control.
The party was in full swing, laughter and music filling the grand hall. Crystal chandeliers shimmered over elegantly dressed guests, and waiters moved seamlessly through the crowd. Chuck Norris had arrived quietly, his calm presence cutting through the noise, holding his pregnant wife's hand with care. People glanced, recognizing the legendary figure, yet no one dared approach too closely. Everything seemed perfect until the chaos erupted. Out of nowhere, a group of masked assailants stormed the hall. The sound of crashing glasses and screams pierced the festive air. Chuck's wife tried to shield herself, her eyes wide with terror. But the attack wasn't random. It was targeted, calculated. And worse, one of the attackers was disguised as a doctor, a figure everyone trusted in the crowded hall. Time seemed to slow as the doctor lunged toward Chuck's wife. Panic rippled through the crowd. Guests scattered, some tripping over expensive rugs, others frozen in shock. The music cut off abruptly. Only screams and the rapid footsteps of danger filled the room. Chuck Norris froze for a moment, not out of fear, but focus. His eyes locked on the threat. Calm, precise, deadly. His wife, clutching her belly, stumbled back. The attacker smirked, thinking he had the upper hand, thinking he could harm her and escape. That's when Chuck moved. In a single heartbeat, he closed the distance between them. Every muscle tensed, every movement perfectly calculated. The calm storm that was Chuck Norris had begun to rise. The crowd didn't fully understand what they were witnessing yet, just that the legendary fighter in front of them was about to unleash something unimaginable. The doctor and his accomplices thought they were in control. They had underestimated him. They didn't know the wrath that comes when someone threatens family. Not just any family, but his pregnant wife. Sparks of chaos ignited in the room. Glass shattered. A chandelier swung perilously, and the attackers realized too late that the calm man they saw was a hurricane waiting to strike. Chuck's eyes narrowed. Every second counted. Every breath, every heartbeat, every move was a warning. The fight nobody could stop was about to begin. And in that instant, the party transformed into a battlefield. The moment Chuck and his wife stepped closer to the reception desk, the doctor's gaze hardened. He didn't just glance at them. He scrutinized them, a mixture of impatience and condescension dripping from every word. Appointment, he snapped, tapping the clipboard like it was a weapon. Hurry it up, we have other patients. Chuck smiled politely, his calm energy a stark contrast to the doctor's aggressive demeanor. Yes, we have an appointment. My wife is pregnant. The words seemed to irritate him even more. Pregnant or not, everyone waits their turn. Don't think special treatment will get you anywhere here. Chuck's wife instinctively leaned closer to him, sensing the rising tension. Her eyes darted nervously around the waiting room, silently pleading with other patients for some sign of intervention. But most sat frozen, unsure of whether to step in or look away. The doctor continued, his tone growing sharper, almost gleeful in his ability to assert authority. Name, he barked. When Chuck answered, he scribbled something carelessly on the clipboard and waved them forward like they were pests. You first, he said, gesturing for Chuck's wife to move ahead. But as she stepped forward, he shuffled paperwork aggressively, jostling her shoulder slightly. She flinched. Chuck reached out instinctively but didn't touch her. He remained perfectly composed. His silence was heavy, almost tangible, and yet the doctor didn't notice it. Or maybe he did, and he reveled in pushing boundaries further. You know, the doctor continued, leaning in slightly. Some people just come in here thinking they're above the rules. Pregnant or not, you're not special. Chuck's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. His calm presence radiated through the room, a silent warning to anyone paying attention. The other patients watched closely now, their discomfort growing as the doctor's arrogance escalated. The doctor called out instructions in a clipped, dismissive manner. Sit there. Wait. Don't bother me with unnecessary questions. He then turned to the nurse, rolling his eyes as if Chuck and his wife were a minor inconvenience in his day. Chuck's wife's hands trembled slightly, and she whispered, I just want this to be over. But Chuck squeezed her hand gently and shook his head. Not yet. Justice comes first. One patient in the waiting room finally spoke up, clearing their throat, and the doctor shot them a glare that could cut steel. "Mind your own business," he barked, his tone dripping with authority. Everyone shrank back into silence. Chuck finally leaned slightly closer to the doctor, voice calm but firm. "We're here for medical care. Respect is not optional." The doctor scoffed, smirking. "Care? Respect? Maybe you think you can lecture me about respect. I'm the one running this hospital. I decide what happens here." He waved his hand dismissively, clearly enjoying the power imbalance. Every word, every gesture reinforced that he believed he controlled not just the room, but the situation entirely. Chuck's calm, measured breathing only seemed to fuel the doctor's arrogance. The nurse looked on, torn between loyalty and fear, clearly hesitant to intervene. The waiting patients shifted uncomfortably, whispers spreading like wildfire. Every eye in the room followed the tension, sensing the imbalance of power and the injustice unfolding. Chuck's silence became deafening. The doctor's repeated insults, impatience, and condescending attitude were met with nothing but quiet strength. It was a battle of wills, and the waiting room, once filled with ordinary tension, now felt like the calm before a storm. And then, the doctor crossed yet another line, jabbing his pen toward Chuck's wife as he barked out instructions, causing her to flinch visibly. The room went still, the weight of his actions settling heavily. The air was thick with suspense. At that moment, it was clear something had to give. The disrespect had escalated beyond simple rudeness. It had become outright intimidation, and the room held its collective breath, waiting to see whether Chuck Norris would snap or stand his ground. Could you stay calm if someone treated you this way? Or would you lose control? The doctor's arrogance was no longer subtle. It had become aggressive. He slammed the clipboard onto the counter so hard the papers scattered. Chuck's wife flinched, instinctively stepping back, clutching her belly. "Move faster," the doctor barked, jabbing at the scattered documents with his pen like it was a sword. His face was red with impatience, a mix of anger and arrogance. "I said move. This isn't a playground." Chuck's hand hovered near his wife, not touching, just a gentle, invisible shield. His calm presence was like a magnet, drawing the attention of everyone in the waiting room. The other patients stopped shifting in their seats, some leaning forward, hearts pounding. The air was thick with tension, every whisper and shuffling foot echoing against the sterile hospital walls. The doctor's voice rose. "What's taking so long?" He stepped closer, uncomfortably close, shoving papers toward Chuck's wife in a careless motion. She instinctively recoiled, her eyes wide with fear. I just, she started, but the words caught in her throat. "Would you stay calm or react?" Chuck's eyes locked onto the doctor. Calm, focused, intense. Not a muscle twitched in frustration, yet his aura filled the room. The doctor, sensing no visible resistance, smirked. He had misread the silence as submission. "You people think you're above me, huh?" The doctor sneered. "Pregnant or not, you will follow my rules. I run this place, and you will do as I say." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Chuck's jaw tightened subtly, but he said nothing. The quiet strength in his stance seemed to press down on the room, making it harder for anyone else to breathe. The doctor's arrogance, once unchecked, was now dangerously exposed to scrutiny. Then it happened. The doctor's hand jabbed roughly at the paperwork again, accidentally brushing Chuck's wife's shoulder. Her eyes filled with fear. "Stop," she whispered, clutching her husband's arm. Chuck's patience, though immense, was being tested to its limit. His calm was no longer just composure. It was a silent storm waiting to break. Every patient could feel it. Every movement, every measured breath from Chuck amplified the tension in the room. The doctor laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think you can lecture me? Stand here and intimidate me? You're wasting your time." He waved dismissively at the nurse, who hesitated, caught between fear and doing what was right. Chuck's eyes didn't leave him. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply radiated control, an unspoken power that made everyone in the room lean forward, waiting for the inevitable. The doctor's smirk faltered slightly, a small crack in the armor of his confidence. "Enough." Chuck's voice was calm, low, and deliberate. It didn't need to shout. The room seemed to hold its breath. The doctor, still standing, was suddenly aware of the silence pressing on him, of the attention focused entirely on his next move. The nurse swallowed nervously. Other patients glanced at each other, tension written on every face. This was no longer a simple act of rudeness. The doctor's behavior had crossed into intimidation and potential harm. And Chuck Norris had not yet acted. The doctor, sensing a shift, tried to regain dominance. "I am in charge here. Do you understand?" he barked, stepping even closer. But Chuck didn't move. He didn't flinch. The calm, unwavering presence of the man in front of him was more threatening than any shout or shove could ever be. Chuck's wife gripped his arm tightly, whispering, "I'm scared." Chuck looked down at her, a soft, reassuring gaze, and then back at the doctor. The calm before the storm had reached its peak. Every person in the room could feel it. The tipping point was near. The doctor had escalated too far. And now, the real consequences of his arrogance were about to unfold. If you were in Chuck's shoes, would you stay calm? Or would you finally lose control? The camera would pan across the tense faces of the waiting room, lingering on every flicker of fear, doubt, and anticipation. Silence reigned, broken only by the faint shuffle of papers and the shallow breaths of those who knew something monumental was about to happen. The waiting room had fallen into a heavy, almost unbearable silence. The doctor, smug and overconfident just moments ago, now sensed a shift he couldn't quite name. Chuck Norris stood there, silent, steady, his eyes locked on the man who had dared disrespect his wife. Not a word was spoken, yet his presence filled the space like a physical force. The nurse, torn between fear and duty, hesitated at the side of the room. She had seen rude doctors before, but never anyone who radiated such quiet authority. Other patients leaned slightly forward in their seats, almost unconsciously, sensing the tension rise with every heartbeat. Every small movement, a shuffle, a cough, a dropped pen, seemed amplified. The air was thick with anticipation, like the seconds before a storm breaks. The doctor, noticing the sudden quiet, smirked nervously. "What are you thinking?" he asked, trying to mask the doubt creeping into his mind. "You gonna lecture me in silence?" Chuck didn't move. He didn't even blink. His calm was the kind of silence that made people uncomfortable, awaiting pressure that demanded attention. The doctor shifted, scratching at his head, trying to reclaim the illusion of control. But the waiting room no longer belonged to him. Every eye had turned toward Chuck. Every whispered word among the patients had ceased. Chuck's wife, still holding his arm, felt a strange sense of reassurance despite the fear. She had watched many men react to rudeness or intimidation with anger, but Chuck's silent strength was different. It wasn't about domination or force. It was about unwavering moral authority, a presence that could make arrogance crumble without a single word. The doctor's smirk faltered further. He tapped his pen nervously against the clipboard, and his earlier bluster began to crack. He took a small step back, instinctively aware that the power dynamic had shifted. Chuck's silence was no surrender, it was a warning. The calm before the storm. Outside the room, a janitor pushed a cart quietly, pausing as if sensing the tension. The patients could feel it too. Something monumental was about to happen, but no one knew exactly what. The silence made it almost unbearable, each second stretching longer than the last. The doctor tried to fill the void with words. "You think you can just stand there and—" Chuck raised a single finger, cutting him off before he could finish. The gesture was subtle, but it commanded absolute attention. The waiting room collectively held its breath. The doctor's face paled slightly, realizing that whatever he had expected from Chuck, fear, intimidation, or argument, would not come. The nurse quietly adjusted a chair, her hands trembling. Other patients exchanged glances, silently acknowledging what they all felt but couldn't articulate. The calmness emanating from Chuck Norris was more powerful than any yelling, more threatening than any physical display. This was not the kind of strength you could match with arrogance or aggression. The doctor, sweating now, attempted one last show of authority, but his words stumbled, his voice cracking. Chuck's piercing gaze didn't waver. Every second of silence, every measured breath, magnified the weight of the moment. The waiting room had become a theater, and Chuck's quiet presence was the main act. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath along with them. The room waited for the explosion that everyone knew was coming, yet no one could predict how it would unfold. Chuck Norris, silent and unmoving, had already won the first round, not through confrontation, but through calm, unwavering power. The suspense was electric. Every patient, every staff member, every observer in that small space felt it. The storm was coming. And when it hit, no one would forget it. Have you ever felt a moment where silence spoke louder than words? Could you hold your calm like Chuck here? The silence had stretched long enough. Every patient, nurse, and staff member in the waiting room felt the tension like a living thing, ready to erupt. The doctor, now visibly uneasy, straightened his posture, as if bracing for a challenge. He thought he had won by intimidating Chuck and his wife, but he was about to discover how wrong he was. Chuck Norris finally spoke. His voice was calm, low, and deliberate, each word measured with authority. Enough. Should people in power face consequences? The word didn't shout or threaten. It didn't need to. It resonated in the room, echoing in the ears of everyone present. Enough. You will treat my wife with the respect she deserves. Now. The doctor blinked, taken aback. He had expected resistance, maybe even anger, but not this quiet command. Respect? Who do you think you are? He scoffed, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. His arrogance was still intact on the surface, but the first cracks were showing. Chuck took a step forward, just enough to close the space, but his movements were deliberate, slow, and composed. I am someone who refuses to let abuse go unchecked. I am someone who stands for fairness. You are here to provide care, not intimidation. Do your job properly, or someone else will make sure you do. The waiting room had gone completely silent. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed to pause in respect for Chuck's presence. Patients leaned forward slightly, captivated. Some gasped, unable to believe the courage and intensity emanating from one man standing quietly against blatant arrogance. The doctor's smirk faltered. He laughed nervously, attempting to regain control. You think yelling or threatening me will work here? I'm in charge. I decide what happens in this hospital. Chuck's gaze didn't waver. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to threaten. The moral weight behind his words was stronger than any authority the doctor could claim. Authority is meaningless without respect, Chuck said, his voice calm but cutting. And today, you have shown neither. Your arrogance has no place here. The doctor waved dismissively, trying to belittle Chuck. You're making a scene. People like you think rules don't apply to them. Chuck's eyes hardened, and his calm intensity filled the space like a physical force. Rules apply to everyone, even you, especially you. And when you abuse your position, someone has to hold you accountable. A few nurses nodded subtly, a quiet acknowledgement of the truth in Chuck's words. Patients exchanged glances, some whispering. Finally, someone's calling him out. Chuck's moral stand had not only defended his wife, it had inspired everyone present. The doctor, now visibly sweating, tried one last attempt at defiance. You think you're the hero here? You're overstepping. Chuck stepped closer, his calm resolve now almost tangible, an invisible wall pressing against the doctor's bravado. I'm not here to be a hero. I'm here to do what's right. And what's right is simple. Treat people with decency and respect. That's all. Do it, or face the consequences. The room seemed to vibrate with the intensity of the moment. The doctor's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the clipboard. His voice cracked when he spoke next. I'm just doing my job. Chuck's expression softened slightly as he glanced at his wife, reassuring her without words. Then he returned his gaze to the doctor. Doing your job doesn't give you the right to hurt others. That ends today. It wasn't yelling. It wasn't anger. It was truth, quiet and powerful, and the kind that makes arrogance crumble. The waiting patients felt the shift immediately. The tables had turned. Respect had moved away from the man in the white coat and now radiated toward the man who stood for justice. The doctor's smirk was gone. His eyes darted nervously to the nurse, to the waiting room, to the people witnessing his failure. He realized, too late, that no amount of authority could protect him from the moral weight of Chuck Norris's words. Chuck finally stepped back, giving a subtle nod to his wife. She exhaled deeply, a mix of relief and awe. The storm had been contained, not by violence or anger, but by unshakable calm, unwavering conviction, and moral clarity. Have you ever had to confront someone abusing power? Would you have the courage to stand like Chuck, calm, firm, and unyielding? The camera pans across the room. The doctor, stunned. The nurse, visibly relieved. The waiting patients, inspired. Chuck's moral stand had turned an oppressive moment into a lesson in courage, respect, and strength. The tension was dissipating, but the impact of the confrontation would linger in everyone's mind. The waiting room had shifted. The energy had changed. Chuck's calm but unwavering stand had done more than silence the doctor. It had exposed his arrogance for everyone to see. The once confident doctor now fidgeted, sweating under the weight of his own behavior. The very authority he had wielded so arrogantly now crumbling in the eyes of all who witnessed it. A soft beep from the hospital's intercom drew everyone's attention. "Security and administration to the main reception area," the voice announced. The words were unremarkable, but in that tense atmosphere, they sounded like the herald of justice. The doctor's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing his face. He realized the situation was no longer under his control. Before he could recover, 2 hospital security officers entered, followed by a senior administrator. The waiting room seemed to shrink as the room collectively held its breath. Chuck remained calm, his posture steady, his gaze unwavering. The quiet authority he had displayed moments earlier now radiated like a spotlight, leaving the doctor feeling exposed and vulnerable. "Doctor," the administrator said, voice firm and professional, "we've received multiple complaints regarding your conduct this morning. Care to explain?" The doctor's hands shook slightly as he tried to maintain composure. I was just trying to manage the patients efficiently," he stammered. "It wasn't personal." Chuck stepped forward, not threatening, just calmly and clearly stating the facts. "Your actions were aggressive, dismissive, and unsafe. My wife's well-being was compromised, and the patients here witnessed your abuse of authority." The administrator's expression hardened. "We take such behavior seriously. There will be an internal investigation immediately, and appropriate actions will be taken." The doctor's facade of control began to crumble entirely. He tried one last attempt at justification, but the words fell flat, drowned out by the quiet truth in Chuck's words and the silent witness of the entire waiting room. The nurse finally spoke, her voice steady but cautious. "He was rude, dismissive, and caused fear among patients. I witnessed it all." Other staff members nodded subtly, confirming what everyone had seen. The crowd of patients, once passive, now felt a subtle sense of vindication. Whispers of support for Chuck filled the room. Some nodded, others murmured quietly in agreement. Respect had shifted completely, away from the doctor and toward the man who had stood for fairness and courage. Chuck's wife exhaled deeply, finally allowing herself a small smile. The threat that had loomed over her only minutes ago was gone. Chuck's quiet strength had not only protected her, but had also reminded everyone present that moral courage could outweigh arrogance and authority. The administrator turned back to the doctor. "You will be suspended pending a full review of your actions. If complaints are verified, further disciplinary measures, including termination, will follow." The doctor's face paled, and for the first time, he seemed genuinely aware of the consequences of his behavior. He realized that authority without respect was meaningless, and that arrogance could only carry someone so far before the truth of their actions caught up with them. Chuck's calm presence remained unwavering, even as the doctor was escorted away. He placed a reassuring hand on his wife's shoulder. "Everything will be fine now," he said softly. The waiting room, still tense, now felt lighter, as if the atmosphere itself had been cleansed by the events that had unfolded. Outside, whispers began spreading among patients and staff alike. The story of Chuck Norris standing up against abuse would be told again and again, not as a tale of confrontation, but as a lesson in courage, patience, and the quiet power of moral authority. Should people in positions of power be held accountable when they abuse it? How would you act in a situation like this? By the time Chuck and his wife were guided toward the exam room, the doctor had been removed from the immediate scene. The tables had turned completely. Respect, once demanded by fear, had now been earned by integrity. The hospital, the staff, and even the patients had witnessed the undeniable lesson. Courage and calm could overcome intimidation, and justice was possible even in moments that seemed hopeless. The storm had passed. The tension that had gripped the hospital waiting room moments ago had been replaced by an almost tangible relief. Chuck Norris and his wife walked calmly toward the exam room, each step measured and confident. The whispers of awe followed them. Patients and staff alike had witnessed something remarkable. Courage, patience, and integrity in its purest form. The doctor, removed from the scene and escorted by security, was already facing the first waves of consequences. An investigation had been launched, complaints were being documented, and the realization of his misconduct had begun to sink in. For the first time, he understood that authority without respect was meaningless. His arrogance had crumbled, and the respect he had demanded through intimidation had been permanently stripped away. Meanwhile, Chuck's wife finally felt safe again. Nurses and staff immediately attended to her, ensuring her comfort and care. The fear that had shadowed her face disappeared, replaced by relief and a quiet gratitude for the calm, unwavering support of her husband. Chuck's presence had been a shield, not through aggression, but through moral authority and quiet courage. Patients in the waiting room began murmuring among themselves, some nodding, some sharing stories of how unusual and inspiring the scene had been. The lesson was clear. Standing up against injustice didn't require shouting or violence. It required steadfastness, clarity, and the courage to do what was right, even when no one else would. The nurse approached Chuck with a small, respectful nod. "Thank you for standing up," she said softly. Chuck merely smiled, a hint of reassurance in his eyes. "It's not about me," he replied. "It's about what's right." The incident didn't stay contained within the hospital walls. Videos and accounts began circulating online, quickly going viral. People across cities and countries shared the story, praising Chuck's composure and moral courage. The narrative wasn't about physical strength. It was about integrity, justice, and the quiet power of standing up for what's right. In classrooms, offices, and households, people discussed the events, the danger of arrogance, the responsibility of those in power, and the importance of moral courage in everyday life. The story became a lesson in respect, a reminder that even small acts of courage could ripple outward, inspiring change and awareness. Chuck's wife, now receiving proper care, looked at him with a grateful smile. "You protected me without losing control," she whispered. Chuck's calm response reflected the depth of his philosophy. Strength isn't always about force. Sometimes it's about doing the right thing at the right time with patience and clarity. Type respect in the comments if you believe no one should be mistreated, no matter who they are. Share this video with friends and family, and let's spread the message that courage, calm, and integrity always win over arrogance and abuse. As Chuck and his wife left the hospital, the atmosphere had changed completely. Where fear and intimidation had once dominated, there was now clarity, respect, and a renewed understanding of the power of moral courage. The story wasn't just about one confrontation. It was about the lessons that could ripple through communities, reminding everyone that standing up for what's right matters, and that even a single act of courage can create a lasting impact. The video closes with a gentle promise. More stories of courage, justice, and resilience are coming. Viewers are invited to comment on the parts that inspired them most, helping shape future content that uplifts, educates, and entertains.